Before we get down to the racing, Il Lombardia today. Very strange having it this early in the year. But before we go into the racing, like I say, I think we're all breathing a huge sigh of relief that Remco Evenepoel seems to be stable after his crash today. Another very nasty crash. He went over the wall of a bridge on the descent of the Somano. Super steep climb where the race selection is often made, flipping over his handlebars and into a ravine that was covered by trees. We think he's fallen 30 or 40 feet. Medical teams were quickly on the scene. So Deceuninck Quickstep, his team, have said this evening that he suffered a fractured pelvis and a right lung contusion. It was a hell of a drop. Of course, real concern for him when it happened. I mean, our hearts were in our mouths today, weren't they? Once again.
Again, yeah, and also for the same team. And I mean, his injuries could have been far, far worse than what we're hearing they are at the moment. So thank goodness for that, really. I mean, it was just another, like you said, heart in your mouth moment when you saw the repeat of the crash and the replay of the crash. Probably a few too many times on the coverage today. But I think he can thank himself lucky, really, that he's got out of it as he has done, because, as I said, that could have been a lot worse. And, you know, looking good to win the race, really, wasn't he, as well? I mean, that's sort of least of his...
out-and-out favourite for today.
He was out-and-out favourite despite the first time he's ever doing it, the first time he's doing a monument. But I guess that's the least of his worries at this point. And as I said, he'll just be thankful that hopefully he's come out of this without anywhere near as severe injuries as we might have expected, given the severity of the crash.
Matt, what did you make of it? You know, he was there on his own. It seemed to be almost a loss of concentration, not to be unfair.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It was a. There's no other way to put it. I mean, sometimes some of the most catastrophic crashes that we see in cycling are purely down to rider error. I mean, luck doesn't come into it. There was just a misjudgment, and I think what you have to look at is the context of the crash as well. You've got arguably one of the finest descenders in the pro peloton, Vincenzo Nibali, applying a bit of pressure. We've seen him in the past distance, riders on a descent, although he can climb very well. Quite often that's where he's made the gap to win big races. Milan San Remo, Il Lombardia, he's done it before. Clearly, Remco just didn't quite get it right and went a bit wide on that corner and just caught the edge. It looked like it was his handlebars he actually caught the edge with, and it catapulted him over the top, because there's pictures of his bike. His bike isn't actually in that bad nick, but he obviously went over the bars. Horrible to see. I'm just glad that he's conscious and that the injuries he sustained aren't quite as bad as they could be, because like everybody else here, I think, and the rest of the viewing public who are watching the race, thought for the worst. And as you said, especially in the context of the luck that the team have had of late with Jakobsen. So hopefully he'll recover from this and move on. But he's going to be shaken for a while, and he'd done double recons. He'd ridden that descent twice over the last week or so. He's been out on his own training and is in the form of his life. One of the most exciting riders of a generation. But I'm just glad the injury isn't as severe as initially thought.
Yeah, Brad, bouncing back from something like this, never easy. But when you're as young as Evenepoel is, 20 years old, will that be the fact that time is on his side and he's still got that sort of carefree abandon of youth, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen. I think he's come late to cycling as well, hasn't he, for his age, and seems to have hit the ground running. He's probably the biggest talent in cycling at the moment, of his age anyway, aside from Van der Poel. He would have been a real favourite for today, the way he's been going. But it remains to be seen, doesn't it? I mean, a crash like that can be quite scary and leave sort of a bit trauma with it, particularly for descending. In the next few years, he might kind of bottle the descents a little bit. Don't know. Every rider's different. But being young, you probably tend to think less about the risk in bike racing. It's probably as you get older and you have crashes of that nature that they sort of set you back, because you realise what's important in life and perhaps don't take as many risks in the future. But it will certainly shake him if he remembers anything about it. It looked like the road closed in a little bit and the wall was sort of further into the road on either side, so it was sort of bottlenecked. And I think it looked like he hit that, am I right, Matt?
Yeah.
And kind of flipped over. And I don't know if from braking so hard as well with the disc brakes that kind of catapulted him a little bit. It is a descent that's caused a lot of problems in the last few years, isn't it? Every race now that you go into, because Horillo crashed in the Giro, didn't he, around that area, went 40 foot down and never raced again. On the exit of a corner of that nature, they should perhaps have hay bales and things on that wall to at least limit riders going over the wall. So there's definitely, again, as we spoke about last week with the Tour of Poland, some safety issues that certainly the UCI can start looking into a bit more for these riders.
Well, once again, we're here talking about rider safety, which has been a theme so far this season. Is it partly because, it's been such a sketchy start, because is there more nerves in the peloton, Matt, than we might usually expect?
I don't necessarily think there's that there's more nerves in the peloton, but I do think that there's a few riders quite clearly. I think there's a big disparity in relation to riders' condition, and there's still riders trying to find the rhythm of racing, and the rhythm of racing isn't just setting it, finding your tempo on a climb and having the condition to race at the point at the end of a race. It's also descending at speed on closed roads, whereas when you're in training, you're not taking the same sort of risk. But when you're put under pressure and you've not raced that much, maybe there's a few more potential unforced errors that you can get. But to be honest with you, on this sort of terrain, part of the game, and it pains me to say it, but part of the game is the ability to push things to the edge. The very nature and what makes this sport so harsh and so beautiful is the fact they're on a knife edge all the time. And basically, it's rider error. If you want to be a pro cyclist, you've got to be able to handle your bike. And I think there's only so much that organisers do about putting barriers up. It's a good point that Brad raised, because there was a very narrow pinch point in the Dauphiné the other day, and it was metal railings. But there was crash barriers over those, two big, thick yellow mattresses, and it was a really innocuous point on the course that they'd obviously looked at it, but how far do you go, I mean, sometimes riders will make unforced errors, and that's just the way it is. But I think rider safety should always be at our forefront. But if there's anything obvious, race organisers generally do a good job. The organisers and UCI should never rest on their laurels. There's always progress to be made on that side of things.
Sometimes, though, it's not unforced errors. That error was kind of forced by Nibali.
Yeah, sorry, I meant the other way.
I just wanted to go back to that point that I think when you won the Tour, Brad, that Nibali was trying to make a difference often on the descents, and that's absolutely fine. He's not hoping that somebody behind him has a horrific crash.
No, it's part of the race, isn't it?
But by virtue of using his talent as a descender, he's hoping to create a gap, whether that's by just going down faster or by somebody making a mistake behind. As I said, he's not going to hope that anybody has a
no. And you can't take that away from the racing, can you? Because that's an exciting part.
And you know what it's like in cycling. We talked about Harillo.
Going downhill is as big a part as going up, isn't it?
Yeah, but it does I was saying this to you earlier, Graham, that you don't think of it as life and death when you're racing, but sometimes when you're dropped, like Pedro Harillo was in 2009, I was there in a group just in front of him, but I was thinking the same thing. Like, if I don't get back onto the peloton now, the breakaway hasn't gone, I could be out of the race. So I'm going to take some risks down this descent to try and make sure I get back to the peloton so that I'm in there for the flat section that's coming. Otherwise, I'm going to be outside the time limit. That's what Pedro Harillo was thinking as well, and he pushed it a bit too far and went over the edge. And Remco today would have been thinking the same thing. Vincenzo's really pushing things on. There's a 3-length gap up to the group, and I need to close that. Otherwise, my race and my hopes of winning might be over. And that's unfortunately the dire consequences of him trying to close that gap. But it's an interesting one. But, descending, as Brad said, is a big part of racing and a part of being a complete bike rider. I don't know what the answer is, because there are so many dangers to bike racing, and obviously some of them need to be mitigated. I think we were chatting earlier, though, that Dan Martin tweeted straight after the crash and said, that downhill every year is what he said, because there've been multiple crashes there in the previous few years as well. So I do wonder whether in situations where it's deemed as dangerous, like the Tour de Polonia sprint as well, whether if everyone's saying, well, this is really dangerous, unfortunately, the only time anything ever happens about it is when you have a really serious crash and everyone's like, oh, well, actually, maybe we should do something about how dangerous that is.
By comparison, actually, on Harillo, so Rabobank rider, we should say, so like you say, the 2009 Giro, he fell 180 feet into a ravine, and nobody would have known about it were it not for your man Jez Hunt as well, getting on the radio to say, hold on a sec.
Yeah. I mean, his bike wasn't quite as visible as Remco's was on the side there. But Jez spotted I can't remember what bikes the Rabobank were using at the time, Giant maybe.
Colnago, wasn't it? I think.
Might well have been. Yeah, I mean, he spotted a bike in the undergrowth and he noticed that there was a number on it, and he got back onto the radio to our sports director, I think was Jean-Paul Van Poppelen, to just make the organisers aware that there's a rider's bike there, and without that they might not ever have found. Well, not ever, but they wouldn't have been so quick to the scene. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, at the other end of his career, we should say, so he never rode a World Tour race again after that. We mentioned Fabio Jakobsen there. We should just give an update on his awful crash on the first stage of the Tour of Poland. So this week he was able to walk from an ambulance onto his flight home back to the Netherlands, where he'll receive additional treatment at the Leiden University Medical Centre. The De Koning Quickstep doctor has been quoted, "Everyone has seen what a heavy fall this was. If you can now see that Fabio is mobile again, that he can stand up again, that he has no fractures to his lower limbs, yes, then you can safely speak of a miracle." Matt, miracle, fair way to sum it up?
I was actually watching this stage at home with Chris Lillywhite, a good mate of mine and ex-teammate, and winning the milk race back in the day, and manager of one of Brad's teams back a year or so ago. And we couldn't believe what unfolded before our very eyes. I kind of wanted to turn the telly off, to be perfectly honest with you, and thankfully we did actually flick from those pictures quite quickly. I honestly felt physically sick, and I thought, I mean, the fact that he didn't break any bones, he had difficulty with his esophagus, a crushed esophagus and a crushed palate. Obviously, a lot of the brunt of the impact was taken by the poor gentleman who happened to be taking a photo at the same time. Had it not been for that bloke, he would have gone straight into the iron kind of gantry, and things could have been worse. Thank goodness that it's not as bad as it seems, but I know there's still a bit of work to go. He had a lot of maxillofacial surgery, didn't he? So, a miracle? Well, I think it's just luck.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's astonishing.
I think Mark Serrault, who crashed as well, that finished third, he said that his speedo was up to 82 kilometres per hour. It is notorious for being a very fast sprint, that one. But if you're in your car and you see 82 kilometres per hour, even on a motorway or highway, it feels fast when you look down the side. I mean, it's incredible just to think that somebody's just crashed in Lycra and a flimsy helmet at that point.
Yeah, I spoke to Dylan Groenewegen during the week. I sent him a message, a voice note, just saying that I'd seen the UCI stuff we talked about last week, and I said, a bunch of basically. And I just wanted to give him a big hug and send him a love, really, because, I realised how hard it must be for him as well. And he sent me a message back sort of saying, thank you, it means so much. Then his girlfriend messaged me about 10 minutes later and said, thank you so much for sending that. He's not had many messages of support like that, and you don't know how much it means to him at this moment. He really needed that. So we were talking about last week, about how hard he'll be taking it.
Both sides to it, yeah.
Really interesting.
So, yeah, I just felt urged to send him a message because, I thought a lot about it, and that, I hope he's all right, and I hope he had good people around him because, he's not really done anything wrong, and, a lot of the blame being heaped on him in terms of life bans and things like that. He's still a human being at the end of the day. So I'm sure he'll be pleased that Jakobsen's back on his feet and not as bad as maybe we appeared to be last week.
Well, it bears repeating, another difficult day for De Koning Quick-Step, but we wish Remco Evenepoel well, we wish Fabio Jakobsen well, and Dylan Groenewegen too.